In the fall of 2019, a retired park ranger named Harold Brennan was hiking through a remote section of the Tongass National Forest in southeastern Alaska when he noticed something that stopped him cold. Beneath a collapsed tangle of old-growth spruce and devil's club, half swallowed by moss and mud, was a wooden beam, not driftwood. A milled, deliberately cut beam, the kind that hadn't been placed in that forest by nature. Harold pushed aside the undergrowth and found a rusted iron hinge, then a rotted doorframe, then a shaft descending into the earth at a steep angle. He had stumbled onto a mine that didn't appear on any modern map, in a forest so thick and so remote that it hadn't seen a human being in generations. What Harold found inside over the following 3 days of careful exploration, with a headlamp, a notebook, and the instincts of a man who had spent 40 years reading the Alaskan wilderness, was nothing short of extraordinary. 25 objects. 25 relics from a forgotten chapter of American history, each one telling a different piece of a story that no history textbook had ever recorded. If you've ever wondered what gets left behind when an entire way of life disappears overnight, stay until the very end of this video. Because number 1 on our list is going to change the way you think about what was really happening in these forests more than a century ago. And if you've never subscribed to this channel, right now is the time. Because we're going to places and finding things that the history books left out completely. Number 25 was the first thing Harold could actually identify without guessing. Sitting just inside the mine entrance, wedged against the right wall, as if someone had set it down in a hurry on their way out and never come back, was a miner's candlestick. Not a candelabra, not a lantern, a single iron spike with a flat disc holder at the top, designed to be hammered into a wooden beam, or jammed into a crack in a rock face so the miner could work with both hands free. The candle was long gone, dissolved into nothing by a century and a half of Alaskan humidity, but the iron was still there, red-brown with oxidation but structurally intact, and the spike showed the distinctive hammer marks of hand-forged metalwork. No two hand-forged candlesticks look exactly alike. The blacksmith's hammer leaves its signature in every strike. And this one had a slight bend at the base that suggested it had been repaired at least once, hammered back into shape by someone who couldn't afford to replace it. In the gold rush era, a miner's candlestick was as essential as his pick. You couldn't work in the dark, and you couldn't hold a candle and a drill at the same time. This little piece of iron, no larger than a man's forearm, was the difference between productive labor and blindness underground. Finding it right at the entrance suggested Harold was right about one thing from the start. Whatever happened here, it happened fast. No one leaves their tools behind unless they have no choice. Number 24 took Harold a few minutes to recognize because it was buried under half an inch of silt, and he initially thought it was just a piece of broken timber. When he brushed it off, he found himself looking at a surveyor's compass, a circumferentor in the old terminology, with a brass case and a cracked glass face. The needle was frozen solid with rust, pointing at an angle that corresponded to nothing Harold could immediately interpret. Surveying compasses were critical tools in the mining era, used to map underground passages, calculate the direction of ore veins, and make decisions about where to dig next. This one was high quality for its era, the kind of instrument that would have cost a working miner 2 weeks' wages. The fact that it was left behind, not pawned, not traded, not carried out, was its own kind of statement about the abruptness of whatever had ended this operation. Number 23 was a leather pouch, or what remained of one. The leather had mostly returned to the earth, but the contents had not. Inside were 17 steel drill bits of varying sizes, their cutting edges still sharp enough to scratch Harold's thumbnail. In hard rock mining, drill bits were consumable items. They dulled fast against quartz and granite, but they were also expensive, difficult to replace in remote locations, and carefully maintained. Miners would often carry their personal bits with them, sharpening them at night by firelight. Finding a full set of bits abandoned underground meant either extreme panic or extreme tragedy, probably both. Number 22 was something that Harold photographed from 3 angles before he touched it, because he wasn't sure what he was looking at. It turned out to be an assay balance, a small, extraordinarily precise scale used to weigh ore samples and determine their gold content. The mechanism was corroded, but the design was clear. two pans suspended from a central beam, with a series of tiny counterweights stored in a wooden case that had partially survived. An assay balance in a mine tunnel rather than a surface camp was unusual. It suggested someone was doing rapid field assays underground, making quick decisions about which sections of rock were worth pursuing and which were waste. That kind of urgency in the testing process points to a mine that was racing against something: time, weather, money, or all three. Number 21 was a coil of what had been a fuse, specifically safety fuse, the kind used to ignite black powder charges for blasting. It was brittle and partially decomposed, but the braided cotton and gunpowder construction was still recognizable. Safety fuse burns at a predictable rate, about 30 seconds per foot, giving miners time to retreat before the charge detonated. The coil Harold found was about 12 feet long, which would have given the user 6 minutes of burn time. A cautious amount, suggesting whoever worked here wasn't cavalier about explosives. The fuse was coiled neatly, not tangled, which told Harold that whoever left it was still organized even under whatever pressure was closing in on this operation. Number 20 was a tin plate and a tin cup, the standard eating vessels of a working miner in the late 1800s. They were dented, scratched, and stained with the residue of 100 meals, and they had been sitting in this tunnel for somewhere between 100 and 150 years. Tin doesn't rust the way iron does, and these pieces were remarkably preserved. The cup still had the ghost of a handle impression where someone's grip had gradually deformed the metal over years of daily use. Whoever owned these ate underground, not at a surface camp, not at a cookhouse, but right here in the dark, probably by candlelight, probably in a hurry. That's a man who barely came up for air. Now, before we go further, I need to know, have you ever found something old in the wilderness that gave you chills? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Number 19 was a hand drill, a steel shaft about 18 inches long, hexagonal in cross-section, with one end ground to a chisel point. In hard rock mining before pneumatic drills became common, everything was done by hand. One miner held the drill and rotated it slightly after each strike. Another swung a 4-pound hammer and hit it. All day long, hour after hour. The drill Harold found had a worn, rounded end, where the hammer had struck thousands of times, and the cutting tip showed the characteristic star pattern that comes from repeated resharpening. This tool had years of hard use in it, and the hands that used it had years of hard use in them too. Number 18 was a small wooden box, about the size of a modern shoebox, lined with what had once been oilskin. The oilskin had deteriorated, but had done its job for a long time. Inside the box was a collection of documents that, while badly damaged, were partially legible. Harold could make out numbers, what appeared to be claim boundaries described in the legal language of the era, and at least 2 different signatures. These were legal documents, likely a mining claim registration or a partnership agreement. The presence of legal paperwork underground, protected from moisture in a lined box, suggested that whoever ran this operation was sophisticated, not a lone prospector with a pan and a dream. This was a business, with legal obligations and documented ownership, which raises the obvious question: where were the owners? And why did they leave their paperwork behind? Number 17 gave Harold his first direct evidence of violence, or at least of conflict. It was a Springfield Model 1873 trapdoor rifle, one of the most common firearms in late 19th century Alaska, leaning against the mine wall with its stock rotted away and its barrel seized with rust. The trapdoor mechanism that gave the rifle its name was still visible, though frozen with corrosion. Rifles were common in the Alaskan wilderness for obvious reasons: bears, wolves, and the occasional human threat. But a rifle left behind in a mine tunnel rather than carried out had a very different implication. This wasn't a man who set his gun down for a moment. This was a man who stopped needing it, or stopped being able to use it. Number 16 was a boot. Just one boot, right leather, men's size approximately 10, with the hobnailed sole that was standard for heavy outdoor labor in the period. The leather upper had largely decomposed, but the sole was still largely intact, the iron hobnails still embedded in the thick leather. Finding one boot is always more unsettling than finding 2. 2 boots means someone removed them intentionally. 1 boot means something else entirely, and Harold didn't let himself think too hard about what. Number 15 was a wooden blasting box, the hand-powered generator used to send an electrical charge to a blasting cap. The box itself was completely rotted, but the internal mechanism, a hand-cranked magneto with copper windings and a steel core, was still present in corroded form. Electrical detonation was more reliable than fuse-based detonation and was adopted by more sophisticated mining operations in the later decades of the 1800s. Its presence here suggested this mine was still operating, or had been established, after about 1875, and was run by people with access to more than just basic equipment. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. We're heading into the deepest part of this mine, and what's in there is not something you're going to want to miss. Number 14 was a collection of 8 glass medicine bottles, still stoppered, still containing liquid. Harold did not open them, wisely, but their labels, though faded, were partially legible. One said laudanum in large letters, which is an opium and alcohol tincture that was the standard painkiller of the 19th century and was available over the counter at any general store. Another appeared to contain quinine, used to treat the malaria that was a genuine threat in parts of Alaska in the warmer months. A third showed the stylized snake and staff symbol associated with medical preparations of the era. This was a medicine kit, carefully assembled and carefully kept. Someone on this crew was managing the health of the workers, which suggested a larger, more organized operation than the equipment alone implied. Number 13 was a spirit level, a glass vial of colored liquid with a bubble, set in a brass frame, used to ensure that mine shafts and supports were being built to true horizontal and vertical. Precision in mine construction was not just about quality, it was about survival. A shaft built out of true would eventually fail, crushing everyone inside. The presence of a spirit level said that someone here cared about doing the structural work correctly, which also meant someone here had the training to know the difference between a mine built to last and one built to fail. Number 12 was a leather-bound journal, so water-damaged as to be nearly unreadable, but with a few pages near the center that had been protected by the compression of the book itself. Harold could make out fragments of entries, references to something he transcribed as 16 men, a date that appeared to be in the late 1880s, and a phrase that appeared repeatedly. He later had it confirmed by a linguistic historian as being in Tlingit, the language of the indigenous people of southeastern Alaska. The exact phrase translated roughly to those who came before. Harold did not pretend to understand what that meant in context, but it meant something to whoever wrote it, because they wrote it more than once. Number 11 was a hand-powered winch, or what remained of one. The iron axle, the drum, the brake mechanism, and about 40 feet of wire rope still wound around it. Winches were used to haul ore buckets up shafts, to lower and raise workers, and to move heavy equipment within the mine. This winch was large enough to lift several hundred pounds, suggesting a shaft of significant depth somewhere nearby. Harold found the shaft 15 minutes later, a vertical drop of approximately 60 feet, with timber cribbing on the walls that had partially collapsed. He did not go down. Number 10 was a set of blacksmith's tools. A small portable forge, iron tongs, a selection of hammerheads without handles, and a collection of iron stock in various sizes. A portable forge in a mine meant that equipment was being repaired and fabricated on site, rather than sent out to a town smithy. That level of self-sufficiency was only economically justified if the mine was very far from any town, which, given the depth of the Tongass, it almost certainly was. Or if the operation needed to be self-contained for reasons that had nothing to do with distance. Number 9 was a wooden crate stenciled with the words, Hercules Powder So, a manufacturer of black powder and early dynamite that was active in the American West from the 1880s onward. The crate was empty, but its presence confirmed both the era and the scale of blasting operations here. Hercules powder was industrial-grade explosive, the kind used for serious hard rock mining, not recreational prospecting. Someone was moving a lot of rock in this mine. Number 8 was the thing that made Harold sit down on the tunnel floor and just breathe for a minute. It was a photograph, a tintype, specifically, in a small paper sleeve that had protected it from the worst of the moisture. The image showed 5 men standing in front of what appeared to be the mine entrance, dressed in working clothes, squinting into sunlight. 4 of the men were clearly miners, beards, heavy boots, the general look of hard outdoor labor. The 5th man was dressed differently, a suit coat, a hat with a narrow brim, and what appeared to be a watch chain. A businessman, a mine owner or investor. All 5 men were looking directly at the camera with the serious expression common to long exposure photography of the era. But one of the miners, second from the left, had one hand slightly raised, palm up, in a gesture that struck Harold as oddly supplicating, as if he was reaching toward something just out of frame. Harold had the photo analyzed later. It was dated, by a photographic historian, to approximately 1891. None of the 5 men in the photo have ever been identified. Number 7 was a collection of Tlingit trade goods, a carved cedar box, a section of chilkat weaving, and 3 copper bracelets of the style known as tinna, associated with trade networks that moved copper from the Copper River Valley throughout southeastern Alaska for centuries before European contact. These were not miners' possessions. These were trade items, the kind of objects that changed hands between indigenous communities and the newcomers moving through their territory. Their presence in the mine did not mean anyone had been robbed. Trade goods ended up in all kinds of places through all kinds of legitimate exchanges. But it meant that the people running this mine had relationships with the Tlingit people of the region, relationships significant enough to result in these objects being brought underground. Harold thought about the journal entry, those who came before, and he thought about it for a long time. Drop a comment right now. What do you think happened to the men in that photograph? I want to know what you're thinking. Number 6 was a set of wooden surveying stakes, painted red at the tips, bundled together with wire. Surveying stakes are used to mark boundaries, measure distances, and record the locations of findings for legal purposes. These stakes were unused. They had never been driven into the ground. A bundle of unused surveying stakes in an abandoned mine tells a very specific story. Someone was preparing to do something. To expand, to record, to claim. Whatever they were preparing to do, they never got to do it. Number 5 was a set of copper mining pans, not gold pans, but larger, deeper pans used in the initial processing of ore before it went to a stamp mill or sluice. These pans showed heavy use and careful maintenance. The copper had been polished repeatedly to remove oxidation, and the rims had been hammered smooth where they had dented. Someone cared about these tools the way you care about tools you intend to keep using for a long time. Finding them abandoned in a mine shaft is like finding a carpenter's treasured handplanes left in a house that was evacuated in the night. Number 4 was a complete set of medical instruments in a wooden case. Scalpels, forceps, a bone saw, curved suture needles, and a glass syringe. This was not a first aid kit. This was a surgeon's kit, the kind carried by military field surgeons and by doctors working in remote industrial operations in the late 1800s. A surgeon's kit means that someone expected serious injuries at this mine, the kind that required more than a bandage. In hard rock mining, that expectation was entirely realistic. Blasting accidents, rock falls, drill injuries. The mortality rate in 19th century mining was catastrophic by modern standards. But having a full surgical kit also means having someone qualified to use it. There was a doctor here, or someone who could do a doctor's work. That person left their tools behind too. Number 3 was a locked iron strongbox, approximately the size of a large briefcase, with a combination mechanism rather than a key lock. Harold could not open it, and did not try to force it. Its weight, Harold estimated 60 to 80 pounds, suggested it was not empty. Combination locks were significantly more expensive than key locks in the 1880s and were used when the owner needed security that couldn't be defeated by stealing a key. Whatever is in that strongbox, someone went to considerable expense to protect it. The box was eventually transported out of the forest by the Alaska State Archaeologist's Office, who have declined to publicly release its contents pending ongoing research. That detail, the official silence, might be the most compelling thing on this entire list. Number 2 was a wooden signpost, hand-lettered in black paint, with words in 2 languages. The upper line was in English and read, "Claim of the Northern Brotherhood Company, EST 1887. The lower line was in Tlingit. The Tlingit translation, confirmed by a linguist at the University of Alaska Southeast, read approximately, "This place has always been known to us." The bilingual sign, commissioned by whoever ran this operation, was not a legal requirement. No law in 1887 Alaska required mine owners to acknowledge indigenous place knowledge. Someone put that Tlingit text on that sign because they wanted to, because it mattered to them that the land had a history before they arrived. In the brutal context of 19th century American resource extraction, that was an almost radical act of recognition. It also raises a question that nobody has yet been able to answer. What did the Northern Brotherhood Company know about this place that made them feel they needed to say that? And now we have reached number 1. This is the item that stopped Harold Brennan in his tracks for nearly 20 minutes on the second day of his exploration. The item that he says still appears in his dreams. The item that the Alaska State Museum in Juneau has now designated a significant historical artifact worthy of professional preservation and ongoing research. It was a map. Not a crude sketch, not a rough diagram. A full, professionally drafted map on heavy linen paper, protected inside a metal tube that had been sealed at both ends with wax, and then wrapped in oilskin, and placed in a niche in the mine wall that had been chiseled out specifically to hold it. Someone hid this map deliberately, with great care, intending it to be found again. The map showed the entire southeastern Alaska coastline from what is now Ketchikan to Juneau, in accurate detail that corresponded closely to modern cartographic surveys. It showed the positions of 17 mine sites, not just one. 17 separate operations scattered through the Tongass, connected by a network of trails that Harold recognized as following the ridgelines and waterways he had hiked for decades. Each mine site was marked with a symbol, and beside each symbol was a number. Harold counted the numbers. They went from 1 to 17. The mine he was standing in was number 9. The map had been drafted with the care of a professional cartographer, and in the lower right corner was a name. Not the Northern Brotherhood Company, not a mining concern, not any organization Harold had ever heard of. It was a personal name, a single name, written in careful copperplate script, followed by the year 1889 and a phrase in Latin that translates as, "For those who come after." Whoever made this map was not just recording a mining operation. They were leaving a message. A deliberately hidden message, in a carefully sealed container, in the middle of the largest national forest in the United States, addressed to a future that included us. We have not yet found the other 16 mines, but we know where to look. Harold Brennan did not go back to that section of the Tongass alone again. He went back with the state archaeologist. He went back with a historian from the University of Alaska. He went back with people who could understand what he had found in a way he couldn't on his own. That's what you do when you find something bigger than yourself. You don't try to carry it alone. You find the people who can help you carry it right. The 25 relics he pulled out of that forgotten mine, or rather cataloged and reported, because he had the wisdom not to take anything, represent a chapter of Alaskan history that has no published record, a company that left no archives, a workforce of at least 16 men whose names we do not know, and a relationship between those men and the indigenous people of this land that the standard historical narrative of American mining has never accounted for. History is not what's in the textbooks. History is what's in the ground, waiting for someone with 40 years of forest knowledge and a good headlamp to come along and pay attention. So here is the challenge I'm leaving you with. What's in your territory that hasn't been found yet? What's under the moss and behind the fallen timber in the place you've been walking past your whole life? The Tongass is 17 million acres. Harold found one mine. The map shows 16 more. If you know the Tongass, if you've hiked it, logged it, fished it, or lived in it, drop something in the comments right now. Because the next find might not come from an archaeologist. It might come from someone exactly like you. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who knows Alaska, and stay curious about what history left behind.